Okay. I'm going to give Polly two minutes before we go to the members. Mr. Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for inviting us in here. And congratulations to yourself for being appointed to high office. You used to be sitting at this side of the table an odd time when I was in here before, but anyhow. Look, I'm delighted to be here.
It was easier too, Polly.
I'm delighted to be here in support of Dan Brennan's case. I first became involved in this in 2003 when Dan and a neighbour of his came to visit me at home one evening, and subsequently went up to the farm, and I knew the minute I drove into the farm that the farmer wasn't the problem, because you'd know from looking around any farmyard whether you were dealing with somebody who was below par or somebody that was on their game, to put it in sporting parlance. And I suppose also, Mr. Chairman, I think the very fact that we have so many of his neighbours here tonight in support of Dan, I think is witness to that fact. There are 10 people here who took time out to come up here this evening to show that they support Dan Brennan, and I thank them for doing it, but they're delighted to be here in support of the man. And I think the one thing I want to say is there was a lot of investigations and reports carried out on this farm over a few years, particularly, like, don't forget, we're talking about a period, say the worst period on the farm was from about 1999 to 2007, when the Celtic Tiger was roaring loud and production in the factory was increased day after day to meet the demand for building materials at the time. And the higher the production went on the farm, the worse in the factory, the worse the situation got on the farm. But I would not believe what I witnessed if I hadn't seen it from my own eyes. So many institutions of this state set out to prove Dan Brennan was a bad farmer, rather than trying to get to the bottom of what the issue was here. They spent a fortune trying to prove Dan Brennan was a bad farmer. Put in a tractor and a diet feed wagon for 2 years and a man driving it, moving cattle to different farms. To the owner of one of those farms that the cattle were moved to is here tonight. And the one thing that the feeding trial proved was that there was no problem with the feed on Dan Brennan's farm, because it worked on the other farm. But yet the feed that was brought from the other farm onto Dan Brennan's farm didn't work with the animals. So it proves to me, as a layperson, that the problem was actually on the farm. Now, only for people like Jim Crilly and indeed Michael Lamb and Tom Slevin and the other veterinary people that were involved, who discovered items like fluoride and cadmium on the farm, we wouldn't be, I suppose, able to get to the bottom of this as much. Because one of the most annoying parts of the whole system here is that the factory does its own monitoring. The EPA doesn't do very little of the monitoring at the factory. And I know from an owner-operator of another factory of a similar type who told me that the EPA always gave them about 2 weeks' notice before they were coming up. We also know, like, what happened around the samples being contaminated with cadmium in the laboratory leaves me very suspicious that it had to be deliberate. But not only that, but other samples that were taken on the farm were mislaid, were lost. Because obviously somebody didn't want them to be tested for cadmium or fluoride. Now, Dan Brennan spent, I think, something like 2 years getting in cattle every 2 weeks for veterinary personnel to play with them and take those blood samples, 600 of which were contaminated in a laboratory, and over 200 of which were mislaid. Now, as a farmer, if I was to present that type of defence for anything that happened on my farm, do you think it'd be accepted by the same Department of Agriculture? I can assure you it would not, and you know well, Mr. Chairman, it would not. And I don't blame Dan Brennan for refusing to cooperate with the department in the later years when they wanted to take more samples and continue to try and prove that the problem was on the farm, rather than looking elsewhere to where the real problem was. Dan Brennan's farm, as Jim pointed out to you, was 12 metres higher than the chimney stack in the factory. EPA admits that it was the main area for fallout from that chimney stack. But yet they refused to go any further than Dan Brennan's farm with their investigations. Mr. Chairman, I won't delay you any longer. As I said, you know, just one simple instance, Mr. Chairman. Dan was working on the farm one day, and there was a pungent smell came to him, and he rang the EPA to complain about it. Within 10 minutes of him ringing the EPA, there was 2 management personnel from the factory on his farm abusing him. Obviously, the EPA had rung the factory. Mr. Chairman, I don't think there's much more that can be said, only that I, as a farmer that's farming not 10 miles from Dan Brennan, support him 100%, and I lay any reputation or credibility I have on the line to support this man. Because I would not believe, as I said, the way the institutions of the state colluded to undermine this individual. He's a strong man to be here, and so his wife is here with him. Because there's a lot of people out there that are not around today that went through a lot less than what Dan Brennan did. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Barry. I'm going to give each member 4 minutes now because we are at a late time, and I think we'll be coming back to this in a private session. So I'll start with Deputy Carter and then Senator Daly. So, Matt, I give you 4 minutes.
Well, thanks. And within the short space of time, I won't ask many questions because, you know, many of the initial questions that would come to mind have already been answered. But I just want to thank you, Oireachtas, for organising this meeting. I was aware from a report last year that Matt Dempsey had in the Farmers Journal of some of the background of the case. But I have to say, listening to the testimonies here this evening, it is nothing short of horrifying. If a fraction of what we've been told is actually proven to be true, then it will be a scandal to match some of the greatest scandals that have ever affected the state. And I have to say, I'm very sorry to hear of the trauma, because I don't think it could be described as anything else, that you, Dan, and your family must have went through. And I think there is undoubtedly going to be a role for this committee in following up, Chair. It just struck me before Mr. Walsh made his comments in respect of, the inspection regime and within the department. But notwithstanding that, if there was any suspicion that a farm operation was causing pollution to another business or to an adjoining property, that farmer would feel a ton of bricks upon them. And therefore, if there is any question that a farm is being polluted by an external activity, then the same approach should follow. Certainly, Chair, I'll be suggesting, and I'm sure you'll be proposing it as well, that we do seek responses from both the Department of Agriculture and the EPA in respect of the questions that have been raised. And if it is your intention to pursue this matter, then all I can say is you'll have my full support. But again, just to thank Dan, because it's never easy to come in and give a personal testimony and to relive, I suppose, the horrors that you have gone through. And I know that the financial loss that you must have endured as a result of this would have been magnificent. But to consider what bearing this would have had on your personal life as well throughout those years, I'm sure it would actually place the financial aspect into the pale. So thank you again, Chair.
Okay. Senator Daly.
Thanks, Chair, and again to welcome the guests here, and I know they all wish they weren't here, I suppose, having heard what we've just heard. And you've been in your submissions, I read them all, and what you've told us here this evening. You've been as far as Brussels with this, but I go as far as saying, I see you've been to hell and back, and I know you want action, not sympathy, but you're certainly getting sympathy. Look, as a farmer myself, and I've yet to meet a farmer who doesn't pride themselves in their husbandry and their stock and their farm and their land, and I can only imagine the nightmare that you lived through at the worst of times of this. I've just a couple of brief questions, Chair, just again trying to get my head around the whole thing, and one would be on the feed trials, and you said they were supervised by Teagasc, and where there was some of your cattle taken another farm, and they were both fed the same laboratory type conditions. And I've read the weight loss, or the very small weight gain down to weight loss from the ones that were kept on your farm, and then how the cattle performed on the ones that were removed. Like, the results of that test are definitive. So where did Teagasc go then with them results as a state body? You know, if they supervised everything that happened and documented the results, to me that's black and white. But where did them results end up, or why were they? Who buried them, for want of a better phrase? The other question, again, just if you could briefly, I'm a bit confused about the contamination of the samples in the laboratory. When were you told that? Was it when the results came back, or did someone hold their hand up early in the place saying, well, that's been a cock up here or whatever? I get it hard to get my head around that whole scenario. And then just finally, your application to the 12 to 16 petitions committee fell with the government. Did you come back? Did you apply for the post 16, the 16 to 20 petitions committee? And what was the outcome of that? That's just it, Chair.
Mr. Brennan.
The one with the feeding trial, the first thing I can say to you, the only thing I can say to you is here, while Pat Kelleher was the boss in the lab in Kilkenny, there was absolutely no problem whatsoever. He was a real decent man. Pat Kelleher got moved. And then all I was met with every day was, you're a bad farmer, I miss your disease management. Even the senior research officer came from Abbottstown, and he told me that one of our sheds is too long, one was too wide, and one was too high.
You just give details then, though, the way they move cattle from one farm to the other.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that in a second.
Sorry.
And my point is then Teagasc then had to go get a specialist from Kildalton College to come up and say that my sheds were right. So each time you were after asking the question, where was Teagasc? Teagasc did stand up, but each time the department thrown a spanner into the works. But to explain about the feed trial, there was 36 cattle picked out on my farm. There was 2 pens of 9 left on my farm and 2 pens of 9 left on Martin Healy's farm. They hired a man. They put into the diet feeder what feed 18 cattle. They fed 9 on my farm, and the tractor drove to Martin Healy's farm and they fed the other 9 with exactly the same amount of silage and the same mix of silage. Then they put Martin's silage into the diet feeder in Martin's, and they fed another pen of 9 up in Martin's, and they drove back to our farm and they fed the other pen of mine on Martin's silage. Then they had 10 bullocks from the Department of Agriculture from Abbottstown, and they fed them with my silage. Now the end result was, my silage and my cattle would work in Martin Healy's yard. My cattle and Martin Healy's silage would work in his yard. My cattle in my own yard with my silage wouldn't work. and my cattle in my own yard with Martin Healy silage wouldn't work at the exact same time. The Abbottstown cattle were given my silage. Now, they really fell asunder, because when you bring in a new animal, that had been nearly worse. Our cattle had a slight tolerance for what was wrong. So that feeding trial was fairly conclusive to me. And when it happened, the first thing happened that we noticed there was something wrong. The lab in Kilkenny said, we don't accept this. After Chagas, Kildalton College weighed the cattle. So they brought down their own scales from Abbottstown, and they started to re-weigh the cattle. But they realised after weighing 3 cattle that the trial was correct. Then they said it was my disease management that caused it. Each vet that came out to me gave me, I won't say abuse, but real smart comments, that we had an invisible disease problem with symptomless salmonella, all stupid stuff that defeats intelligence. Stuff that you would, like, one shed is too long, one was too wide, and one was too high. All this kind of nonsense went on for 3 years. And Porrick said I got in cattle for 2 years. 6.5 years, I got in cattle for the department and the vet college. And I cooperated 100% with them. I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to milk my cows, to be ready for the vet college for 6 o'clock, to go catch 77 cattle every second Monday. And I'd done that for year in, year out. And in the end, the vet college came to me, they rang me in Tom Slevin and Michael Lamb. Tom Slevin and Michael Lamb were the 2 vets. Tom Slevin was the vet in Castlecomer, and Michael Lamb was the vet in Kilkenny. They left the report on our kitchen table in December 2008. And they said it's cadmium poisoning. Your cattle have 95% of the symptoms. And this report is going to the department, they said, but they won't be happy. They came back in February, 2 of them, and they said, we'll be another month getting the report together. They rang me on the 18th of March, the professor out of the vet college, and said, I'm not allowed to give you the report. And they more or less cut off contact. And then I got a phone call from the Deputy Chief Veterinary Inspector in October 2009 telling me, sorry, a little glitch happened on your farm, he says. The cadmium didn't come out of the brick factory at all. It was accidentally put into the samples when they were digesting the samples. The whole thing was just stroke of a pen, the whole thing was gone.
Okay. Okay. You okay, Paul? Joe?
Thanks very much. And Mr. Brennan, I want to thank you for coming in and giving such a heartfelt testimony. And I know you're not here for sympathy, and you want to get a resolution to this. I suppose I was particularly struck by part of Matt Dempsey's testimony when he said it's rare for vets when they identify a problem that they come so forcefully and affirmatively behind a farmer. So it's very evident that you have a case, and we probably have a history in this country of agencies and state bodies failing people, but it's probably rare that 5 state agencies combine to fail one person, and that's certainly what's happened in your case. You have Chagas, Department of Agriculture, HSE, Kilkenny County Council and DPA, and I think all of those people, the Chair, have to come before the committee and answer the questions. Obviously there's some degree of answers that we will get at this committee, but I think your case shines a light on really what has been a horrific chapter in your life, but a very dark passage too in terms of this country, in terms of accountability and responsibility. Everything from you were failed by Kilkenny County Council when the site was probably given planning permission. My limited engineer, and I could tell you that you wouldn't put a facility like that in a valley where your farm was going to be 12 metres over the chimney. It simply beggars belief. I think the whole process deserves a full inquiry. I think there's an awful amount of documents that need to be salvaged. I think you're at very much a starting point here, but I think nothing short of a full inquiry into what happened on your farm. I think you deserve it. More importantly, your neighbours deserve it. In your very detailed testimony, you speak of the parish priest speaking out about the number of deaths, the incidence of cancer in the local area, and no disrespect to you, but I think this is a wider issue for your community, and I think you probably bore the brunt of the scars, and I can see it etched on your face. I can see pain and anguish etched on your face here today, and I think as your neighbour and friend Porrick Walsh would have said, it would have broken lesser men, and you are a remarkable man to be here. But Chair, I'm in no doubt that the least this man and his community deserves is a full inquiry, and all agencies of the state brought in, their evidence given and held to account, but I do think there's an awful lot of documentation that clearly you haven't had access to, and despite the best efforts of Jim Crilly, you probably haven't had access to, and I'm sure there's documents and reports lying in drawers and in archive boxes, not only in the EU but here in the Department of Agriculture, and I think it beholds us as a committee to start the ball rolling, but ultimately I think the end result of this is that there needs to be a full and detailed inquiry into what happened on your farm. If that takes a week, if that takes a month, if it takes a year, if we were able to do it for planning inquiries, we can surely do it for a farmer and a community that were quite literally brought to their knees. And I just want to, again, thank you for having the strength and the determination to go through with it, and also to thank your wife. Something like this would have broken many households and many families, and it's testimony to your strength that you've managed to come this far. You know, I was just going through your catalogue there. You were 10 years battling with Europe, and then suddenly a box was sent back. You know, we have testimony in many instances where people were given the remains of children to take them home in boxes, but to hear that 10 years of your life was dispatched back in a box that had to be booked onto a plane because it was so big and brought back here, and then you get no results here either. We failed you as a society, we failed you as a state, and as I said, Chair, this man deserves, at a very minimum, a full and frank inquiry, and whatever repercussions that brings on afterwards, let them flow. Thank you.
Okay, Deputy Fitzwaterous.
First of all, welcome, and to the other people that's with you. I suppose one of the worst cases, my son Jackie would have talked about this, and I listened to the Petitions Committee. It's probably one of the worst cases of somebody being failed by the state that ever I've seen. I don't agree with going to the European Petitions Committee. I was there myself years ago in Boggs, and I wasted my time. And the sad part about it is for you. Everywhere you've gone, people have said it's terrible what has happened to you. It's wrong, but no one has ever fixed the problem. That's the bottom line. And I fear that the political system, I don't know whether it's fit to fix it for you. It's a damn bell thing to say to you, because it could be permanent governments, be it in Brussels or be it here. There's someone somewhere blocking justice for you, to be quite blunt about it. There's a couple of questions I have, and I don't want, one thing, Jim, I don't want a mile of a lesson. I just want a short. Is there evidence? You said at one stage you were talking about in kilograms and grams. Is there evidence somewhere that the EPA has that was 200 times more the name of that? And that's one, just either yes or no. And is there evidence that, I can't think of the name of the stuff that was coming candy, right? That if that goes into animals, that it does the damage. That from a veterinary perspective, that's all I'm saying. Pádraig, you were involved, and you were involved in the IFA at the time, and that. Has anyone looked at a legal case in basically if you had the veterinarians backing you up, and if you have the likes of the EPA reports and that? Did anyone ever look at taking them on? I know a farmer never wants to go into the courts. I understand that, because the fear of money. But was there anything ever looked at like that? And thirdly, I'm going to make one proposal here. And he probably won't do it, but I think there's only one way in this. There's a new, basically, inquiry has to happen into it. And I think if the minister showed, you've lost faith in his system, to be quite frank about it. You've lost faith in it, because you've been kicked around. You've been told you're the greatest fella ever, everywhere you went, of the story you're told, and that it's wrong. But that doesn't put money in your pocket for what you've lost down through the years. And is there, if there was good faith shown by the Department of Agriculture, that let the likes of this committee appoint some investigative person with scientific knowledge, veterinary knowledge, to be able to go through every bit of it, and like the company, and I've made inquiries, might be closed, but they're not gone, right? So I think there's still a bit of life there, yes. So, and I'm not going to stay on it because the rest of them I want to leave them, but like it's horrendous, and I'm going to put that to the committee, or we'll talk about it later. But someone has to somewhere take this by the scruff of the neck. I'm not a scientist or I'm not a vet, but Jesus, we're farmers, and we know that if there's something wrong, there's something wrong, and you don't have to go into Trinity to know if an animal is, if they're losing weight, and then you bring them somewhere else and they're putting on weight, then there's something wrong fairly close to you. Was there any Eve Gutter stuff or any? You got Eve Gutters in his farm. You didn't happen to get Eve Gutters in the Birua building 10 or 12 metres away, or any evidence of when you swabbed? Was there any evidence of the same contamination there? That's and after that, I'm not going to stay talking here all night, but I think, you know, like, there's no good we here promising you. You were sick of that, to be quite honest about it. You were sick of going places. You've travelled to Brussels. I don't think Brussels was the place, because it happened in this country. It happened under our department's watch. It happened under the DPA's watch. It happened under local authority watch. And it happened in this country, okay?
Okay. Mr. Gray, just a brief answer to the question that Mr. Small has asked.
That's a copy of the email that I got under FOI. I was very surprised to get it. That is the smoking gun. And I think UCD gave that to me, because in FOI, you're not guaranteed to get anything. They don't give it to you unless, here, we'll give it to them. And they give me that, and that says exact, and the answer is 1,000, not 200. It was a reduction by 1,000. And yeah, that's the answer.
Chairman, just on the legal issue, like, Dan has looked at that, but the risks are too high. And when you have, like, you know, we're all convinced here that there was a lot of collusion with the institutes of the state. As I said at the outset, I wouldn't believe this. I'm not a skeptic by nature. I wouldn't believe this if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes and experienced it myself. But the risks, there's been so much collusion between various bodies and very good people, very good veterinary people in the early days were very helpful to Dan and went to a lot of rounds doing work for us. And all of a sudden, they were put under pressure and they pulled back. Yes. There's no question about it. One of them in particular, our manager, put his 2 hands on her shoulders and suggested that she needed to be careful. And it happened with a lot of people who were very helpful to us. And like, the risk for Dan Brennan in taking a court case when you don't know what sort of lies are going to be told in that court case against you, they're too great. That should not happen in this country in this day and age. And it's 20 years ago since it happened, Michael. Not today.
Okay, just as chairman, I just want to, like, we're hearing the evidence here this evening, but I just want to say for the record, like, nothing has been proven on this case. So I just want to put that on the record, and I'm not in one way trying to be smart now or anything else, but like, we have a lot of state agencies here who there has been, you know, evidence presented against this evening, but unfortunately we've never got back to a case where someone has adjudicated on it. So I just want to say there has been no verdict on any of the state agencies. So I just want to put that on the record for the committee record. Okay, yes, Dan.
I just want to say something, Jackie. Tom Slevin, the vet in Castlecomer, when we got PMs done on our cattle, Tom Slevin, the vet in Castlecomer, spotted there was 11 PMs wrong. There was bone starting to form in the kidneys, the arteries, and soft tissues in the animals. Bone started to form inside in the animals, right? He went to Dublin. He contacted the Department of Agriculture, and he told them, I wanted to get a pathologist from England to look at these. They agreed, and they told Tom, you go pick the pathologist in England. So Tom went and he picked Mr. X. And he brought back his name, He gave it to the department, and the department wrote back to him and said, sorry, Mr. X is not suitable. He went back,
Mr. X is what, Dan?
Mr. X is not suitable.
All right.
So back he goes to England again, and he picks Mr. Y, sends it to the department. Sorry, Mr. Y is not suitable. That happened 3 times. So there's a deliberate attempt not to look at what's wrong. Like if you have bones going in the arteries of cattle and growing in the lungs of them, there's something seriously wrong. When you can cut their bones with a knife, there's something seriously wrong. That's not, how could that be my fault? How could that be a disease problem? That would have showed up before. But there's this deliberate attempt not to let anybody else look at what's wrong.
Okay. Deputy McGuinness.
Chairman, thanks. I'm not a member of this committee, so I'm thankful for the time you're giving me. I'm here to support Dan Brennan, his wife, and the community of Castlecomer. But I can assure you that if this was in any other constituency, I'd be sitting here as well, because I believe that Dan Brennan and his family have been blackguarded by the state and a number of state agencies. Well, what you have heard here tonight is the truth from a man whose farm you can judge by driving into it. He is an excellent farmer, and when you drive into that yard, you just know you're with the farmer that is professional and that is experienced and that is conducting his business in the way that modern farmers do nowadays. Every turn that he took, he was met with an obstacle. So in 2004-2009, when all of these complaints were investigated, when you went to the European petitions, the members there, and this is what the information piece tells us, the members there supported you and acknowledged that the claims that you were making were indeed, as far as they were concerned, they were correct. You were correct. So we've established that. We've also established that out of all of the analysis that you can take without getting lost in the figures, that there was something wrong between your farm and that factory. And that's pretty clear. And like Mr. Dempsey, when I visited your farm recently, I saw the difference between what is there now and what was there during the course of all of these investigations. Now, if you're going to have an inquiry, Chairman, I would suggest that it would be an inquiry that would bring all of the players, including the factory. We need compatibility in relation to that, and you need terms of reference. And I would like to see that happening, so that Dan Brennan, who has been blackguarded by the state, who is describing to us what essentially is a cover-up and a deliberate attempt to label Dan Brennan as a poor farmer. He has the right to defend that. But he can't do it because you have 2 big players on the other side of that bench facing Dan Brennan. You have the state with an unlimited pocket, and you have a commercial interest with an unlimited pocket that will do anything to prevent Dan Brennan from having the truth upheld by some part of this state that has blackguarded him. So therefore, as politicians representing the public, we should not be afraid to demand an inquiry, because it's in the interest of the state to learn where it made the mistakes, or to learn who did what wrong to Dan Brennan, so that it won't happen again to another one. If we turn a blind eye to this, and we don't demand and put in place the ultimate inquiry to get at the truth, then we will become, like the EU Petitions Committee, we will become just a sounding board for people. It has to stop. And I'm suggesting that it should stop with Dan Brennan. And I think there's a mountain of evidence there from the time that I first engaged with Dan Brennan and his wife. I'm delighted to see the IFA here in such support. And I think that's indicative of what they feel about Dan Brennan's case. So we need to respond to him as an Oireachtas. And I'm suggesting that that type of inquiry should be something that the committee should investigate. So you're taking the responsibility and the costs away from Dan Brennan. You're placing it on the state. They put him in this position anyway. And you're giving the opportunity to all state agencies and the commercial interests involved to come before a public session and explain themselves. Otherwise, as I say, you're just creating further cynicism about politics, about politicians and what they're doing and not doing. Allowing these questions to remain unanswered is not good. Now, I'll finish on this, Chairman, but I've been asking parliamentary questions to and fro with the department for a long time, and Dan knows this. But the department said to me that they didn't and wouldn't conduct any investigations relative to the period after 2008, in spite of the fact that they had spent €600,000 on the investigation so far. So if you're spending that kind of money, taxpayers' money, on an investigation, surely you have an obligation to bring it to an end, to point the finger at the state, legally, or at Dan Brennan. And I would say that the Department of Agriculture is falling short of its responsibility in spending $600,000 and not getting to the end of the problem. Because Dan Brennan's life, to this point, has been ruined. His family have been put under enormous pressure. I don't know how he withstood it. And it's a great credit to his wife, family and community that he has withstood it. But he's turning to us this evening as Oireachtas members, members of this Parliament, and the question and challenge for all of us is this. Are we going to allow the state to trump Dan Brennan in terms of the truth? Are we going to allow the state to use taxpayers' money to shut up Dan Brennan? And my answer to both of those questions is that we should not tolerate that type of standard. The truth is the truth. And an inquiry is the only way to deal with this and to deal with the wrongs that have been inflicted on Dan Brennan and his family.
Okay, John. Deputy Brown, and then I'll go to Deputy Function. Deputy Brown.
Yeah, good. I just want to say well done to Mr. Brennan, and want to be associated with all the remarks that has been made there so far. Look, it's frightening, some of the stuff that we've heard there all evening, and an awful lot of questions need to be answered, Chair. And I don't know who met, I think, and Joe Flaherty and the other Oireachtas members have said that there needs to be an inquiry or serious questions need to be answered by the department. And just to lend my support, and Matt said champagne support behind the asking and trying to deal with this situation. Can I just ask one question though? It may have been answered earlier. The comedian that was being spoken about, and I don't know who was speaking about earlier, that is in the air, and it really frightened me to think that it was that simple and that it could stay around. Well, after that being released, is that absorbed by neighbouring land or for or that, or is it still a potential risk to Dan Brennan and his family and his farm, but also the community down there?
Did you get that?
And I leave it at that, Chair, because look, at the lads have been there a long time with the voting and that, and I'd imagine at this stage everything was answered. Just if I get a quick answer to that.
Is there a continuing risk from what happened in up to 08?
Yeah, is there still
The factory is now closed.
Is that kind of thing still in the air that can still affect Dan and his farm and his family and the wider community down there?
I think the answer to that, Deputy Brown, is that the performance on the farm has recovered completely. So I'd say whatever poisonous was there is gone out of the atmosphere.
No,
Yeah.
In humans, cadmium has a biological half-life of 15 years. It doesn't go out of you. What you take in 5 years, 10 years ago is still in you, and it accumulates and it doesn't go away. It accumulates primarily in the kidneys, causing irreversible damage. We haven't gone into it here in respect to the privacy of Dan and his family, but that's an area that wants to be addressed as well. Human health risks are ongoing. Cadmium is carcinogenic, and exposure has been associated with an increased risk, cancer of the kidney, breast and prostate, Parkinson's disease, high blood pressure, emphysema, neurodegenerative disorders, osteoporosis. It's a wonder there's anybody left alive in Castlecomer.
Yeah.
Oh, it isn't funny, you know. Okay.
No, okay, go on.
Okay, thanks, Deputy Brown. Deputy Function?
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm also not a member of this committee like Deputy McGuinness, so I appreciate, and I know that you've all been here a very long time. I suppose there's two things I want to say. First of all, whenever you take on the system or the state in any way, shape or form, you are up against it and you're nearly painted to be crazy or you'll be dismissed, and they will do everything in their power to, you know, basically not answer the questions. So that leads me to my main point, which is I'm not on this committee, but I chair the Children's Committee, and we've spent a huge amount of our time dealing with the fallout, the legacy of so many failings of the state through the mother and baby homes. That commission of investigation, when people first heard that was going to happen, they were delighted. They thought finally somebody will listen, will get answers. And in fact, it ended up with people nearly feeling more frustrated. So the point I want to make is whatever type of an investigation or inquiry is done, it has to be accountable. It can't just be like that, because that could be nearly used as another tick the box exercise. You've obviously been experiencing for the past, you know, how many years at this stage where people will just pass the buck or say that that's not relevant to our department, or, you know, no, you're wrong. So, you know, you don't want a situation where if you get an inquiry and then all of a sudden they, you know, that's the state saying, well, we've done that now, we've done the inquiry, and then it's still actually not adequate. So it's really important that that's done correctly. I don't think that they would allow a committee to do that type of an investigation. I don't think that would be, I think it would have to be like a commission of investigation, but it's really important that all of that is watched and that all the terms of reference, like that's key, that's crucial, just from dealing with other people that come up against it when they actually thought finally they were getting their justice, and in fact they got the opposite. It's just really important that it's done correctly and there's accountability, that it's not just kind of a sympathy exercise, because as others have said, that's not what you're looking for. You've persevered with this against all the odds over the years, and like that at times I'm sure where all the agencies were named out that were basically against you. I mean, that's an impossible task. You know, the story in itself is absolutely shocking, but it's important that it's not just an inquiry, that it's done correctly, that there's accountability, and that all the answers, and I would agree with what Joe was saying about the various agencies all being brought into it, but it's so important that the terms of reference, and I think sometimes when you hear there's going to be an inquiry, people think, great, that's it, we're finally going to get answers, that can nearly be overlooked. So just that would be my advice. The other thing I wanted to mention was, and I'm conscious I'm not a member of this committee, but I think the committee should follow up some of the stuff that Mr. Walsh was saying in relation to the factories nearly kind of self-regulation, and if the EPA does come out that they get something like 2 weeks notice. I mean, that to me just seems, I don't know if that's changed since, but that to me seems really unacceptable that you would have that level of notice for an inspection.
Okay, no problem. Minister Noonan, do you want to pass any comment?
Again, just to thank Dan and the other witnesses for what has been stark evidence here this evening. I had to dip in and out for voting, but I am familiar with the case. I was on the farm with then Minister John Gormley and Mary White quite a number of years ago, and I suppose the one thing I'll say that is that I visited a lot of farms over the last couple of years in my own role with in my department, and the one thing I take from the farm visits I do is the great pride that farmers take in their farms, in their land, in their herd, and in their work. And to have that questioned, to have the work that you do and your integrity questioned and brought under a spotlight, I think is just awful. And I can't imagine the trauma it has been to you, Dan, and your family for this length of time. And I think what you've heard here this evening has been universal support, and it's up to the committee, through you, your good chairmanship, to plot a way forward in terms of the evidence that you've heard here this evening. But again, just to offer my support to Dan and his family, and again to thank him for his courage and his perseverance over a very, very long period of time to you and your family. I think
justice needs to be brought here, and I think that's important. So again, just to thank you for your...
Okay, thank you, Minister.
for my vote.
Okay, I'm going to conclude today's meeting. To be frank, I don't know how we're going to take this to the next stage, but the only commitment I'll make this evening is that this committee will meet in a private session and we'll discuss what we can do to take this forward. And, you know, as I think someone has said there, a full tribunal will be outside the scope of this committee. But, you know, we've heard the evidence here this evening, and, you know, this is on the public record of the Oireachtas after tonight's fairly long hearing. So I think that in itself is important. I think that the evidence that you're given there and the submissions that you made are all now on public record. But look, I'm going to close today's meeting. Thank Mr. Brennan for coming in here. Thank the witnesses and his neighbours and friends, and most importantly his good wife for coming in here and presenting the case to us. And I think to be any farmer's worst nightmare to have a situation like this on your farm, you know, that kind of trauma over that period of time, and you know, getting up in the morning and not knowing what you'd face when you'd go out the door into your farm, it was horrific. I have met Mr. Brennan on a few occasions, so I suppose I'm very familiar with the case at this stage. But look, we will sit down as a committee and see how we can progress it and what is the best way to bring justification to the I suppose, as Dan has said to me on a couple of occasions, all he wants is that to be told that the issues on his farm were not of his making. And yes, Parry.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I'd like that you'd keep Dan informed of whatever is happening, and if there are to be any further meetings of the committee with representatives of the department, etc., we'd like to be aware of it at least. Yes. And
we won't be doing that in secret, Parry. Okay. The committee will next meet in public on Wednesday the 7th of December at 5:30 p.m. when the committee in the first session will hear from the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Marine, Mr. Charlie McConnell TD, on the pre-Agri Fish Council meeting regarding 2023 fish quotas. The second session will examine fish quotas, decommissioning with representatives on the fishing industry. As there's no further business, the meeting now stands adjourned. Okay, thanks everyone.